Hello, my name is Muwanta Green, and I'm your host for the PlebeianView Podcast. The PlebeianView Podcast aims to be a leading voice in ideas in creating a fair and equitable world where all people are entitled to life, liberty, and happiness.
Nation, I just can't stand much more.
Welcome to the PlebeianView Part 2, Episode 2. Coming to you on this spring day, April 3rd, 2021, the first full month of spring. Even though we can't enjoy spring like we normally would because of this ongoing pandemic that's been with us for over a year now worldwide, and also the increase in violence that's going on in this country, also in other parts of the world, specifically in this country against people of Asian descent, and also ongoing against people of color being perpetrated by the police department and the whole law and order thing in America. So let's look at the Second Amendment. What does it really mean? And the time in which it was written, does that apply now in the 21st century? A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Let's listen to this again. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is the part that so-called gun right folks keep talking about. I come from the perspective as being a veteran. In fact, I'm a Vietnam War veteran. I was discharged from the United States Navy in November 1969. And another fact that most people don't maybe understand and maybe don't know, military personnel, whether you're in the Navy, Air Force, Marine, Army, whatever branch you are, we swear allegiance to the Constitution, not to no president, not to no leader, not to no politician, but to the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's right. We swear to protect the country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So keeping that in mind, when this Constitution was formed, the only people that could actually vote and have a say on it was white men who had property, human property, and also land. So how democratic was the thought behind this? There's some thought and premise that it was created in order for these men to be able to keep control and capture their human property, their runaway slaves, how to capture them. We're going to talk about that and how that applies. This is going to be very interesting to talk about this. I know there's many views on this, but I'm coming from a veteran who knows what the Constitution is about, and so forth from a progressive point of view, which the PlebeianView tries to put out there. Let us further examine the Second Amendment. And as I always like to do, I like to give a reference to my understanding, and also people can further read themselves so they get analysis, understanding themselves. Today, in talking about the Second Amendment, I'm going to refer to this book that I find very enlightening and historically very accurate. It's called The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by Tom Hartman. That's Tom, T-H-O-M, Hartman, H-A-R-T-M-A-N-N. In this book, he gets into a good analysis of the history of the Second Amendment and how it came about, from slavery all the way up to the present. He takes an in-depth historical view. He examines the brutal role guns have played in American history, from genocide of the Native American to the enforcement of slavery. Slave patrols are in fact the Second Amendment's well-regulated militia. Listen to this again. Slave patrols are in fact the Second Amendment's well-regulated militias. And this came about because of Southern fear. The slave masters had fear of uprisings. There were many uprisings, not just the famous one you heard about, Nat Turner, but many where the master was killed, the plantation was burnt. African people didn't go into slavery peacefully. there is many fighting back. So Hartman goes into a depth analysis of this and how this applies. He also talks about the racist post-war civil order. He shows how the NRA, conservative Supreme Court justices, use spacious logic in the event of virtual unlimited individual right to own guns, which has enabled every growing number of mass shootings in the United States. Also, got my attention very well was Chapter 7, the Cop Watch, and the connection to gun control in the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party for self-defense, as you know, they believed in expressing the Second Amendment, and they believed in self-defense of the black community. The Black Panther Party always respond when the cops were in our neighborhoods, and used to stand around and watch what they did. At the same time, they were armed. This became very unsettling for the establishment to have black men and women armed watching the police. Ronald Reagan, who was president this time, decided to change the law from being the right to carry an open weapon, a rifle, or any weapon, to making it more about control, where you couldn't carry one concealed. You had to have a license in order to carry one. So in other words, the thought of black men and women armed has always been considered dangerous to the society we live in. And that goes back to the slave patrols, the beginnings of the so-called militia. It's important items we must understand to understand how we got to the current debate and understanding of the Second Amendment. And we also need to examine, where does this fit into the 21st century? This is not the Wild Wild West. This is not slavery in America, chattel slavery. This is supposed to be an open and free society. And why do we have more guns than any other nation in the world? Our civilians are more armed and organized. But when white men carry guns, there is no big problem. Just like the ones who went into the Capitol on the 6th of March and tried to do the insurrection. They were armed, a lot of them was. So realistically, we got to look at, what is a progressive society? Is it about everybody being armed to the teeth so we can have a shootout at the OK Corral like it was in the West? No. It's about using logic, things that promote a better humanity. These are things I want to bring out when we talk about the Second Amendment. And it's time, I think, for a constitutional convention in this country where the Constitution itself is updated. And the information we have based on the current world we live in, not based on the 17th, 18th century America that was founded on genocide and slavery, but on a free, humane America that puts every human life on the same level. And nobody's life is no better than anybody else's. These are things I want us to think about as we think about the Second Amendment and what does that really mean. Look forward to your feedback and information. You can reach me at the PlebeianView@gmail.com. Please send your feedback. What do you feel about what I say? Because we have to have a healthy understanding, a healthy debate in order to move society ahead. I'd like to end this podcast with a couple of more thoughts about violence. Martin Luther King Jr., who we like to call the Prince of Peace, said that violence or riots is the voice of the unheard. H. Rap Brown, activist and militant brother in the 60s, also said, violence is American as cherry pie. America taught black people to be violent. In order to understand violence, because people always talk about violence in the black community, we have to understand the source of it. Also, to be hungry is a form of violence. To be homeless is a form of violence. Not to have a good job at a living wage is a form of violence. We must examine the conditions that create violence in order to really change society for the better. That's why we must understand the history of this country that was founded on violence and how we ended up to where we are today. Remember, we have more shootings per capita than any other country in the world. We have more people in jail than any other country in the world. Those are all forms of violence. So we must change the system, the structure, the government in order to get rid of violence. Once again, this is Muwata Green of the Plebeian View. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks with another topic of interest to all of us. Have a good day.
Just can't stand much more. I like the forest, the dark city that stagger on the coastline, and a nation that just can't stand much more. I like the forest.